Good evening. This is GrassRoots Television, Channel 12 from Aspen. Tonight's subject is the Red Brick Arts and Recreation Center. And we'd like to have call-ins for those people who have questions about this project and, of course, opinions about it, pro and con. With me tonight on the panel are, on the extreme right, Robert Siegel from Aspen, and Lee Ambrose, not on the extreme right, but to the immediate right. And I think as we get into this, as I introduce the people, their position is going to be very clear to you as to why they're here tonight. I'm going to go to the extreme left, Rachel Richard, who is a member of the City Council, but she's told me she's not here as a member of the City Council tonight, but an activist for this project. And is it Charles or Chuck?
Chuck.
Chuck Brandt, who is chairman of the school board. And my name is Bob Blake, and I am an impartial moderator. I received a telephone call this morning. It woke me up and asked if I would do this, because I think they, so whoever was going to do it couldn't at the last minute. And the person who had asked me to do it said, well, we need somebody who's completely neutral. And I must say that I am completely neutral. I'll start by just identifying who I am and why I'm neutral. I've just recently moved to Aspen from Europe. I've been living in the Netherlands for the last 12 years, but I'm also an old hand at Aspen. I skied Ajax in 1948. Remember staying at the Jerome Hotel when it was $2.50 a night plus included breakfast. The good old days. I've been coming to Aspen since the late 50s. Involved in the Aspen Design Conference. For many years I've come to most of those events. And in the middle 80s, while living in Europe, I purchased a house in Aspen with the full intention of living here full time. I've recently retired from my company, which is headquartered in Europe, and moved back to Aspen, so now I am finally a native since 1948. It took a few years to get here. But with regard to the Red Brick Arts and Recreation Center, I do not have an opinion on this. I'm very interested in the subject. I have been very much involved in my whole life in the arts and continue to be. I am an architect and a designer by training, and now that I'm living in Aspen, I have a design consultancy. And by the way, this is not a commercial because I don't work for anybody locally. I'm working for international clients. So I'd like to kick this off with, I think we'll go to the extreme right, and I'll ask Robert Siegel to make some kind of a statement about his feelings about this project.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, I am against this. I feel very strongly that this is a huge mistake for the town, for the city, rather. And I have a variety of reasons why, and I guess this is the time to go through them before we have our argument. First and foremost, as was mentioned last Friday at the Tax Revolt meeting, this is a bunch of arts groups, a loose bunch that seems to not be able to get their own private funding. I don't really feel that it's our job to support them. However, I am not against the arts, and as the people who are doing in Pioneer Park are in the middle of completing, if these arts groups can raise the amount of money, the $3.2 million plus the $1 million to fix up the school, then good for them. Let them raise that money, let them buy the school, and then let them do whatever they want with it. They can be the landlord, they can sublease places to parts of it to other institutions to raise money. I feel that if the city does buy it, what will ultimately happen is that the arts groups will fail to make their payments, and it will then be used for a city administration office or more, which will increase traffic flow in the area and allow the city to expand their already bloated payroll. Secondly, Secondly, I feel that as a city, and I don't want to get overly technical, but as a city at the moment, we are at the maximum of our bond rating. Our bond rating is already down to a single A rating because our payments are 24.25% of revenues. That's what our debt payments are to service the existing debt in this town. If we exceed another 0.75%, then what will happen is our ability to borrow will go down because investors will not wish to buy bonds issued by Aspen. And in order to induce investors to purchase these bonds, we'll have to raise our interest that we pay them by probably 1 or 2 or 3 points. On a different level, one of the big questions is, if this building was so unsafe for children to go to school in, then how can it suddenly be made so safe for them to study the arts in, et cetera, which then raises a question is, was the town sold a bill of goods, basically, by the board when they pressed for the school bond issue to build the school, which I basically have no problem with. It's a beautiful school, and my kids will be attending it. One thing that I think is very important, I have a lot of things that I think are important, so just stop me when I'm overstepping my important things here, but a lot of people who are going to be voting on this are not property owners and probably feel that this is a nice thing and it's a wonderful PR thing for the town, and it really has no impact on them because they're not an owner. It's only going to affect the property owners, and there's probably a huge misconception that most property owners are absentee millionaires from New York, Chicago, or LA. The fact is that there are a tremendous amount of landowners in town who rent these properties to those of you who are renters, and any tax increase will simply be passed along to you. And if it ends up being a $1,000 a year tax increase, then any prudent landlord will pass along a $100 or $120 a month increase to you to pay for that. A landlord is not going to be hurt by this. The only people that will be hurt by this are those of us who in fact are full-time residents and don't rent out our properties and have watched our taxes skyrocket, certainly between the last time we paid and this time, in some cases 58%, in some cases 200%. One of the more technical points that I have, having spent my life as a contractor and being very familiar with the real estate community in other cities in this country, is that the gross square footage, which would be the wall-to-wall square footage of that building, is approximately 30,000 feet, 34,000 I think it's calculated as here. The rental income that they intend to charge on is only 15,000 square feet. Traditionally, the renters in this town pay net, triple net, which is wall-to-wall, everything inside, end of story, you pay for it. The city appears to be not only discounting the rental to $12 a square foot, which that close to the core is unrealistically low, but they also appear to be knocking off 50% of the square footage because it is unusable. And I had no argument with that. It is in fact unusable, which maybe makes the building unsuitable for this purpose, but somebody has to recover that dollars. You cannot just say this is unusable. It's the same in a commercial building. Elevator space is basically unusable, but the tenants must pay for it. Somebody has to pay for that.
Maybe we'll pick up some of your other points later.
I have others. Go ahead.
Okay. I would like, there are a number of interesting questions that have come up or opinions that have come up. I think I'd like to move now to the extreme left and ask Rachel to state her position, and maybe you can clarify some of the questions that have already been raised. But before we do that, for those of you who are watching this show and plan to call in a little later, think carefully what you frame your questions and think about who you'd like to answer your questions. So when you call in, not only identify yourself, but tell us who you'd like to address, or maybe just want to address to the entire panel. But if you know who you want to address it to, we will direct the question. Rachel, it's your turn.
Sure, thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking Mary Martin for organizing this and giving me a chance to address some of the information and some of the rumor that's circulating about this project. First off, I'd like to begin by clarifying the price, Robert. It's not $3.2 million, it's $2.6 million. And with a $1 million renovation, that is a $3.6 million total price tag that the community is being asked to bond for. I'm going to start with why I'm getting involved in this project and why I've given it my all, trying to inform the public and get the information out to the public. And then I'll try and address some of the individual points that Robert raised. I'm I'm behind this 100% because I find it to be consistent with the platforms that I took when I ran for office last spring. And some of those platforms specifically were to increase community serving programs and to increase our sense of community and to increase programs that support our youth and to support our children. I really only stated, I think, 5 platforms, and that was one of the top ones. To increase the programs for our kids, the summer day camp, the recreation programs, those sort of things, to continue to make this a community. I think that's the most important part, actually, to being a successful resort, that we have a successful community. And the second aspect is that I think this is very consistent with my feelings about Aspen as a resort economy. Our resort economy has spent the past 10 years investing itself in other ways to see a year-round income than just the ski areas. We have tried over the past 10 years to diversify our economy so that we don't see the sudden ups and downs in sales tax revenues, and so we don't have the swings between people being employed at 20% of the time and then being employed 100% of the time. We talk about economic benefit and cost and property tax cost. Quite frankly, when people are able to work 50 weeks a year and they're able to take home tips in the summer and in the fall, that adds to our economy. I also am in this very much as an advocate for the arts. And as the arts groups come before a city council, they're not a loose goose, willy-nilly band, as was described here. They've been pushing arts in this community 10, 15, 20 years. We have a foundation of arts in this economy, in this town, that the rest of the state is copying, that Telluride is trying to have arts, Crested Butte is trying to have arts, Breckenridge is trying to have arts. And their art programs are not succeeding. And they're not succeeding because it's not a year-round, living and breathing arts community. What we're talking about trying to do with the Red Brick Project is to maintain a living and breathing, year-round resident artist community. And that's the difference between a real arts program and a facade of an arts program. I have a copy of a book here I've been reading recently. It's Megatrends 2000 by John Nesbitt, and it's about the future directions of the United States. And the second chapter is dedicated solely to a renaissance in the arts, and that investment in the arts is a multiplier effect on local economies, that for every dollar spent in arts, so much more comes back in tourist economy, in residential real estate values, in business investments, that sports spending in the United States has now finally been eclipsed by arts spending, and more people are spending their dollars going to the arts. The baby boomers are the most educated class in America right now, the most educated decade of Americans we've ever had. They like the arts and they can afford the price tag to get into the arts, and I see that's where our local economy is going. A lot of individuals came up, individual points came up discussing this process. One of the most rampant rumors is that the city has an interest in turning this into offices. Let me assure you that's simply not the case. That is not why I'm putting my efforts behind this. That's not why anyone has ever been involved in this project. The only part of the project that includes city offices is the recreation offices moving into the Red Brick Gymnasium. It makes sense that the recreation offices that will be administering the basketball programs and the baseball programs and the gymnastic programs and the volleyball programs and all those things be located at the Red Brick Gym. This also works in very well with the city's capital asset management in that we remove those offices from the second floor of the Ice Garden. Those offices have been at the Ice Garden on the second floor for over 10 years, and frankly, that used to be a lobby, and I think it should be a lobby again, someplace for the kids' birthday parties, someplace to generate a little revenue for the Ice Garden from the snack bar and the viewing area of the ice rink. I think the most direct way to address the concern regarding whether offices are going to be moving into the Red Brick at some point in the future is simply through the rezoning process. When we take this parcel from the existing school to the uses with the arts, it will go through a public rezoning process. There will be hearings in front of Planning and Zoning and the City Council as well. That's where we'll also be able to take care of some of the impacts to the neighborhood. By rezoning this with a SPA, a specially planned area overlay, the conditions of approval can specifically preclude city offices from ever being in that building. I think that's what we should do. The bond rating question was raised. Quite frankly, bonds are at their lowest rate right now in 10 years. And the difference between the bond payment we were looking at in the fall when we started seeing if we could find a mechanism to save this site for public use, the the annual payments have dropped about $40,000 from when we first thought this was a valid and valuable endeavor. I have a copy of Moody's bond rating municipal credit report for the City of Aspen. It was dated December 16th, 1991, when we refunded our electric bonds. We refunded to take advantage of lower interest rates. Our rating is an A rating. There are, I think, maybe one other resort community in the state that has an A rating. And to quote specifically from the report, Aspen is an internationally known and affluent ski resort with a seasonal and tourist-dependent economy. While this community relies heavily on the vulnerable ski industry, Aspen has successfully promoted year-round tourist activities and provide economic diversity. I think by continuing to provide that type of economic diversity with our arts community, we're going to maintain our bond rating. The city also has embarked on a very aggressive capital and asset management plan. We've been pulling citizens together to this. We have a capital citizens committee that is looking for long-range asset management plans for all our facilities, the golf course, the maintenance facility, the ice garden, City Hall, and we've aggressively begun paying off existing debt. We now have a no lease purchase type of policy for city vehicles or things like that. And quite frankly, I think the city is making an investment in itself and an investment in the community by moving forward with this. If the question is, can we afford it, we certainly can.
Thank you. That's a very efficient answer. There was one point that Robert raised that I didn't hear an answer to, and that was the gross square footage question of the 34,800 square feet and the rental income only coming from 15,500 leasable. Could you give us an insight into that?
Sure, I can. The building is not laid out per se as you would normally lay out an office building. The restrooms and those sort of areas are not really leasable in the classic sense. Also of note on that is that there is no real rental income designated to be coming from the gymnasium, which is over 6,000 square feet of the site. The gymnasium, by not having a price tag associated with it per se, will be available for a wide range of community uses, from holiday bazaars and Halloween festivities to just the basketball games and t-ball.
GrassRoots.
You taking calls yet?
Well, we might as well, seeing you're on the line. Could you identify yourself, please?
Certainly. Catherine Lee.
Catherine Lee.
I have my calls for Rachel Richards. Is
And
that who
you want to talk to Rachel Richards? Yes. Catherine, are you a city or are you a county resident?
City.
City resident, thank you. Please address your question then to Rachel.
Okay, is she on the line?
She will be.
Catherine, hello.
Hi, Rachel, I had a question for you.
Yes.
Since the city always requires that there's parking, my question to you is there should be approximately 100 parking spaces if regarding the red brick school building, if the arts groups was to come in there. Exactly how are y'all going to provide for this?
Okay, Catherine, I think the audience has heard your question, so I'm going to go ahead and hang up the phone now and just answer on TV. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Here we go. Did everybody hear the question? Catherine asked about the parking spaces required with the usage at the building. My personal vision of that sort of thing, in front of the building, I can't say this is how it's going to happen, but I would really very much like to see that the pedestrian corridor that's created in the summer for the walk to the MAA tent and to the campus of the nonprofits out at the Institute become a year-round policy. And I think that some of the concerns will be addressed through the Aspen Area Community Plan, which is, I just sat through a meeting on that this afternoon, and they're coming forward with some recommendations that we institute a residential parking permit system so that homeowners within an area are allowed permits to park within that area, and basically employees from the Hotel Jerome and other areas are not. I would like to see all the arts groups be required to park at the parking garage and walk over to the site at the Red Brick. But there already is some existing parking off to the side. I'm not sure the exact space counts. And there's 15 spaces. Yeah, I'm not sure the exact space count. There might be some cost associated with mitigating the parking somewhere else. There might be some situations where we can institute some van pooling and some overall transportation management type of scenarios. We've been looking very distinctly and spent a long time trying to find a different way to mitigate parking with the library as it came forward, and put it back basically to the planning office for not being complete enough. But rather than just saying we want 30 people or 100 people or how many other people to continue to drive into town, we want to find ways of promoting mass transit and those sort of issues within projects like this. I don't have a solid answer on that, quite honestly. I don't know exactly how it's going to be addressed, and I don't think 100 spaces is the
GrassRoots.
number.
Calling to ask a question.
Yes, could you identify yourself, please?
Jim Reed.
Jim Ree? Thank you. Where you live, Jim?
In town.
In town, okay.
And toward Chuck Brandt. And I'm just wondering why we, as taxpayers, have to buy the building a second time.
Did you get that question?
No, I didn't hear it.
Chuck Brandt, it's addressed to you, and the caller wants to know why we have to buy the building the second time.
Jim, it isn't clear that we are buying the building the second time. That is a historical question, if you will, that the city and, in fact, the school district want to take a look at. I pulled copies this last week of the various deeds which make up the red brick building parcel, and there are 7 deeds to the Aspen School District dating back to the early 1900s and as late as, I think, 1941. The latest deed in 1941 was from Walter Pepke for 7, 8, or 9 lots. And it isn't clear as to whether the school district in fact paid for the property at that time, or whether Walter Pepke in fact gifted those 8 or 9 or 10 lots to the school district. So there may be a portion of that property that district taxpayers didn't pay for. Certainly district taxpayers paid for the building. There was the original building and then 3 additions through the last 40 years, and all of us within the school district paid for it. The reason why this issue comes up is city taxpayers are saying we're getting a double bite here. We have paid school district taxes through the years, and now we're asked through the city and the city tax process to, quote, buy the building. The school board's responsibility is to a broader constituency than just the city constituency. Since the school district's boundary are larger than the city, we have a fiduciary responsibility to realize as much revenue from the sale of the red brick building property as we possibly can. So to honor our obligations to taxpayers outside of the city, we felt that we had to obtain the highest price.
Well, but so again, you're saying, you're admitting that, yes, we did actually pay for it twice.
And
that's what we're going to have to do. If we're in the city, we pay the first part of it.
That's right.
And then we got to do it again, and I think it's redundant.
It may be redundant. We couldn't figure out a way to get around that dilemma if we were to gift it to the city for all the good stated reasons. We would have had district taxpayers yelling at us for not fulfilling our responsibility to them.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that's right. I don't think you should be looking at the city to be purchasing it for in that situation.
Mm-hmm. We did receive another offer. We received a private offer, that is an offer from a private party, and working through the mathematics of that offer, it was a conditional offer. It was for more money, but if the private developer was successful in getting the necessary city approvals for a private residential development on that property, that could have taken a year to 15 months. Given the various conditions. What's that?
I think that's short-sightedness. You know, yes, it might take longer because of what the city wants and won't let a private developer go through it, but you know, I just don't feel that taxpayers should pay for it again, and if the arts groups need it so badly, then let them come up with the money.
Well, let me quickly answer the question. The return to the Aspen School District is identical with respect to the bottom line of the private offer versus the city offer. The benefits to us gives us the dollars a lot sooner than if we had went with a private offer. And secondly, there is a community benefit by selling it to the city. So those were 2 of the considerations that we took into account. Let me give you back to the monitor.
Well, wouldn't you?
Yes, I think a number of people are trying to reach us, so
Well, just one other, wouldn't it be a benefit to put it back into the tax pool and get more tax?
the question is, wouldn't it be a benefit to put it back in the tax pool? And we'll address that question. We'll see if an answer comes out from the other panelists.
Okay.
Thanks for calling.
Often calls for a few minutes because two of the other panelists haven't had a chance to speak. You're also excited about getting your questions into us. So to keep moving ahead, I'd like to ask Lee Ambrose if he would start dealing with this subject from his point of view.
I'll try to deal with it. Rachel makes some very good points always, and Rachel is very glib, and I think I know that she believes in what she's saying. However, I'm a little, there were a few years ago there was an ad on radio and TV that talked about Eddie somebody who was mad, and he was damn mad.
Crazy Eddie.
Crazy Eddie. No, Crazy Eddie was a car salesman, but the other Eddie was damn mad because of what we're being done to. Our representatives are to represent us. They're not to do to us what they're to do for us. And what we're finding is that we are being done to. There is an incredible arrogance in our governments that is overriding what the people really are thinking and wanting, I believe. And example of that arrogance is the fact that in your 1992 taxes, there is already appropriated money for the purchase of this building. That's 1992, that's this year. Yes, those taxes are collected next year, but it is already in the city budget. I find that incredibly arrogant on the part of the city council to put that into our budget at this point. In addition, they recently spent $2,500 because they assume that the people are going to support this issue. There's a Kirkner-Moore report that dated January 1991 that really questions the validity of the bonding in this community. And I quote from that report: "If the city is to maintain its credit rating, it must return to its conservative budgeting of revenues and expenditures and maintain a general fund balance in the range of 20 to 25% of general fund expenditures." In addition, it talked about the increase in expenditures between 1980 and 1988 and 1990 of 48%. We're not paying attention to those things. The yellow brick school has been used for the early learning center. There are people in this community that were providing early learning. But now you and I are paying in our taxes or in our rents. Don't forget, rents make up part of taxes. We are paying for those programs that are going in the yellow brick school. And they just came to the city with a request for an additional $40,000. They're not living up to their contract. They aren't open on weekends. Who's monitoring all of this? And yet we're still being done too. Are the city offices expanding? Maybe they're not expanding, but city government is expanding, and there are 6,000 people in this community approximately. City government is growing, the population is not growing. It has not grown in years, and yet the budget's growing and the number of people working for the city are growing. I'm damn mad. Rachel said her platform was increase community serving problems is probably realistic. I agree. Increase community service programs if you can get cost-benefit ratios, but what is the cost? We are $47 million in debt today. With this added on, we go over $50 million in debt. That's over $8,000 in debt per person in the city of Aspen. I guess what I'm saying is we've about had enough. We can't spend our way to prosperity. We can't rely on sales tax revenues to solve all our problems forever. They won't happen. We're going to have a bad snow year. We're going to have a period where it hurts. And there is an opportunity to take a piece of property and return at least a part of it to the tax rolls, where instead of being a net deficit situation. We're talking about a net earnings situation, and I think it's important for us to start looking at that. I would venture to guess with you that this community contributes more per capita to the arts than perhaps any community in the United States. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you. I think we're getting a lot of strong opinions, and of course, there's facts being put on the table.
Can I have an opportunity to respond?
I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond, but I'd like to give Chuck Brandt an opportunity to say something. He had a chance to answer some questions a few
Okay.
minutes ago, but Chuck,
Great.
it's your turn, then we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Aspen School District's consideration with respect to the sale of the red brick building property is really driven by the district's finances. This is perhaps beginning to sound like a broken record, but the State Finance Act, which was adopted in 1988, capped the school district revenues for all recreational districts, not only Aspen, but Eagle Vale, Breckenridge, Steamboat, and other recreational school districts. Because we are on a fixed income, we have had to do some necessary fat trimming, and that's not all bad. But when we look at 4 years of fat trimming and a indefinite future of fixed revenues, we went to the books and asked our financial people in the school district to project at what point will we reach a deficit situation. Deficit is inevitable with a fixed income, but we, like any other business, if you will, are faced with inflationary pressures of rising gasoline costs for school buses, rising cost of school buses themselves, rising utility rates, rising insurance, employee payroll, etc. We will hit the deficit years beginning in 1993, 1994, and that projected deficit is $217,000. Then it gets worse. In 1994-95, our projected deficit at that point is $1,000,001. 95-96, it grows to $2,253,000. That was the reason why the school district, on a one-time basis last fall, elected to retain the mill levy at the same level, and that generated $2.6 million. As you can see from these, and as you heard from these figures with respect to projected deficits, that will not cover deficits for very long into the future. Since the elementary school moved to the new campus, we have a surplus property on our hands. We have a red brick building, which is zoned residential. It limits the use, and it was an opportunity for us to, pursuant to a ballot question, which the electorate passed on 3 years ago, enabled us to put the property for sale. The best offer we had was from the City of Aspen. That generated the most money to the school district in the shortest amount of time. If Governor Romer's referendum for the 1% sales tax is on the ballot this fall and is not passed by the state, our deficit projections will skyrocket. It has been estimated that with a revenue shortfall, which is to be funded by the 1% sales tax, if that isn't passed, all Colorado schools will have their revenues cut by 12%. So that would be not only a fixed income, but a situation beginning next year would be faced with a 12% budget reduction. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. We are trying to maintain the quality education system which we believe that we have, and we are looking to all possible resources to raise the revenues to forestall as long as possible what will eventually be very severe and further budget cuts to the school district.
Well, thank you, Chuck. I promised Rachel a chance to respond to Lee Ambrose's points.
Great.
It's your turn.
Thank you very much. Lee has mentioned a lot of different areas, kind of wide-ranging about why government can't be trusted and why this project cannot move forward. I would like to, after addressing his concern, get back to focusing on the merits of the project itself and their benefits to the community. But I'll try to address what Lee has brought up individually. There's been a phrase thrown around quite a bit, return it to the tax rolls, return it to the tax rolls. Quite honestly, the site has never been on the tax rolls. The school district has owned it. It's never been a tax-producing revenue source so far. The taxes, The taxes on on a city valuation of $1 million would be about $765 a year, the city portion of somebody's tax bill. If there was $10 million worth of real estate built on that parcel, there would be about $7,650 returned to the city tax rolls. That is barely going to cover the beginning cost of our infrastructure to service those same residences. Aspen is, and probably always will be, a sales tax-based economy. Less than 10% of our budget comes from property taxes. When we have strong, high sales tax economy on a year-round basis, those monies go to things that have been voted for by the Aspen voters and values that are held high by Aspen voters. The 6th penny open space fund, the 7th penny transportation fund, and the 0.45 cent affordable housing and daycare fund. The city, I'd also like to back up a second on the question of what has the city done bringing this project forward. Quite honestly, we have been beseeched by individuals, citizens, and collectively as groups to try to find some mechanism to hold this property in a community-serving use, in public hands for public uses. The Citizens Blue Ribbon Capital Committee made buying the red brick building a tie for their #1 recommendation for what the city should do for capital asset management. And they spent a good bit of time with our bond council discussing our current financial situation and looking for ways for us to reduce those in other areas. The Aspen Area Community Comp Plan has been a 2-year effort with over 400 citizens participating to determine where do we want to be on the continuum, where do we want to be as a community in 10 years. One of their #1 recommendations in that draft is buying the red brick building for continued community use. The In-Town School Sites Committee that formed and began working on the project when the school first built the new buildings up here to find out what would be the best use of these buildings after the school had moved. And the recommendation was strongly, keep the building in community use. I think it's very exciting that we find a way to work with the arts groups to produce revenue for the building and to produce revenue to help retire the bond debts and to help the community buy the site. We all know that real estate is depressed right now. The price will never be lower to buy that property in that end of town in Aspen ever. The site will never reoccur again. This is a one-time opportunity for all of us to hold on to that site. At $2.6 million, the price is more than fair. And the real estate is an investment. It will hold its value. Look at the other assets we have in this community. The golf course, Heron Park, Pepke Park, Wagner Park. Isn't it time our generation did something for the next generation? Isn't it time we put a little into this town instead of expecting the ski company or a Chicago donor or somebody else to do it for us? This is going to be a treasure for our community in the future. It's going to have as many uses on it as the Rio Grande.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. I would like to remind you this is a call-in show. I did ask you a few minutes ago to hold off till everybody had a chance to speak, and they've all made their basic statements. But even if calls don't come in, I think we have more to say at this table. I mentioned earlier on that I'm very neutral on this, and I'm learning a lot tonight. But I have a couple of questions, and I'd like to just put them on the table. And one of them relates to what Robert Siegel said before about the question of safety and the usability of these facilities. Now, in the program, there's $1 million for renovation. I took some time today to go over and look at the building. I didn't want to sit up here without ever having been in it, and I didn't go to school there, as you know. So I walked through the building, and what I found was the water fountains didn't work, the Coke machine was out of order, but I heard a lot of sounds coming out of the various practice rooms, and the gymnasium was being used for an orchestra practice. As I've told you before, I'm an architect. I know something about construction. And one question I raise, is $1 million going to cover a real renovation for that building to meet all of the requirements or the needs or the desires of the people that have put together the program? Because we're talking about all kinds of arts groups working. And I assume that in the $1 million, and somebody must have done some pre-thinking about this, that building will be soundproofed and it will be safe. There was an issue about a couple of years ago when the issue came up about moving and building a new school, that part of the city was not a safe place for children. I was reminded of it in doing a little homework today after Mary Martin called me this morning. And I read an article by Sue Lum from Aspen Times earlier this week. And I'll just quote her because I think this is a question that has to be answered. It said when the approach was to build a new school, the red brick schoolhouse was festered with poisonous asbestos. The yellow brick school was substandard. The downtown site was a traffic fatality waiting to happen. Both buildings were fire traps, and the prospect of refurbishing them was so patently unattainable that the school board refused to put that option on the ballot. And of course she goes on to say, what's changed? So I'm putting that question on the table for somebody to answer, and I think Bob Siegel also has a question. Let me take this call.
GrassRoots.
Hi, I'd like to participate in this. My name is Cy Coleman, and I'm responsible for KAJX Public Radio. And when you mentioned soundproofing, you struck a chord that's close to my heart. I actually have done tests at that building, and as the operator of a classical music radio station, I've been very concerned about that. And the walls in that building are thicker than currently is part of normal architectural practice. Those walls are made of plaster and lathing, not sheetrock and airspace. The mass of those walls is unlike any building that I've seen in town here. So from the point of view of soundproofing, I think we couldn't ask for better circumstances in that regard. To deal with a little more broad aspect of...
Let me just reply, because having been there today, I could hear music coming out of several different locations in walking in the hallway. Now, I didn't go into those rooms because they were closed, because they were used for practice, so I don't know if the sound was penetrating from one side of the building to the other through the hallway, but when you were in the public areas of the building, you could hear the various practice sessions going on.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
That's why I raised the question.
Yeah. I appreciate that information. I wanted to make a broader point with regard to your concern about perhaps the building not being a totally modern building, totally up to snuff aesthetically, or in fact in need of safety repairs. Clearly the $1 million will be to get rid of asbestos and to handle essential requirements. So those safety issues, I think you could probably agree, will be taken care of by that amount of funding. The broader point I want to make is that it's really quoting Fritz Benedict, who gave a talk about a year ago based on an important book that he read, whose author escapes me. And the basic point that Fritz made, Fritz is, of course, the dean of local Aspen architects. The point that Fritz made was that one of the vital things that a community needs is old buildings. It's not just that a community always wants to have new buildings, because then everything comes in at top dollar, and you don't really have any flexibility. New buildings really need to be contracted out. You need to have everything nailed down hard. The good thing about some municipalities is that they have old buildings which can be used flexibly for not only arts, but for all kinds of activities that themselves don't have a AAA bond rating. So it's a major thing for our community to retain this, because to replace it with 6 or 7, I guess is what it would be, spec homes, is not going to really add to our sense of community. But to have this as a public facility with the flexibility to use for varying purposes as time goes on is of an incredible importance to the town. And I also think it's a very good investment. There aren't many people, including the City of Aspen, that have lost a whole lot of money investing in Aspen real estate over the long run. There have been some speculators who have.
Yeah. Cy, the panelists here want to know if you have a question. You've made a very good...
I wanted to make a speech.
You've made a speech. Yes, well, you've done that.
Okay, well,
do you have a question?
Do I have a question? Yeah, of Mr. Ambrose. Isn't there more to life than just checkbook economics? I mean, we're talking about spending money. There's no question about it. We're really spending some money here. But have you considered what we're getting back in terms of value to our town?
Okay, Cy, thank you very much for calling in. He's going to respond to you. Thank you.
Yes, I really have looked at what we might be getting back, and that's my concern, is that I'm not sure we really are getting enough back. And so many times, there's so many needs of this community. Last night I was at a transportation meeting, and we talk about the possibility of a fixed guideway system of some kind between Snowmass and Aspen to enhance the experience up here and to preserve that tax base, and particularly that sales tax base that we need. And so I'm very much concerned about where those dollars go. I happened to be an art major when I was in college, and I've been involved with the arts for a long, long time. And so I'm not against the arts. I think the arts can be supported, and those arts that are essential in a community and are wanted by a community are going to be supported no matter. The community does not have to rise up in force necessarily to support them at that level. So yes, I do look very carefully at what we have coming back, and I don't believe there's the cost-benefit ratio that should be there for this project.
I think Robert Siegel has been waiting for a chance,
at the bit.
chomping at the bit. Bob, why don't you say something?
First of all, I have a major problem with the use of the word investment for this building, particularly when you refer to it as a wonderful real estate investment, because it's quite clear you never intend to sell it, so it's not an investment. From a real estate dollars and cents value, sorry, it's simply not an investment. Secondly, in response to Mr. Cohn, old buildings of value in this community are the historic Victorians throughout the West End. 40-year-old brick buildings, what we used to call them taxpayers back east, are not historical buildings. They are not architectural wonders. There's nothing to be gained by that. Next, I think something that's really overlooked is that taking this above and beyond the arts issue, because obviously, judging by the volume of tourists that are in town presently, since you can't get a parking space, you can't walk around, it's very difficult to move in this town right now. Clearly, the arts that we have presently are more than adequate to draw record numbers of tourists and tourist dollars into the town during the summer. The other half of the year, we have an enormous mountain plus one 10 miles away, 6 miles away, whatever, which draws the rest of the tourists. Therefore, I think we have enough attractions for the summer and the winter. I don't think we need to be a training ground for art. We obviously seem to be able to attract existing artists to come here. That was an aside. The big issue here is that within the next 3 months, we're going to be asked to vote on yet another big-ticket item of much greater impact and a much more personal impact to everyone in this town, which is a hospital funding bill. Bond, rather. This is not a forum for that, so we're not going to discuss that. The only thing that needs to be mentioned to those of you who are voters and who will watch this is that on a net basis, you have needs and you have wants. This arts building is a want. It's not a need. The town will not shrivel up and die if we don't get it. The hospital is looking for $11 million, which they're never going to get from us. But they certainly do need something, and that's a real need. Any of us can get run over tomorrow. We can all have a little face plant on the ski slope. So you really are going to have to decide, if we're going to raise $3 million, where do you want to spend your $3 million? Do you want to spend it on something that may have a true impact on you, or do you want to spend it on something that obviously we already have enough of, at least obviously to me, obviously not enough to everyone else. And the point being, you have to prioritize where you have to spend. Next year, you're probably going to get a bond issue floated for the water plant, which is going to need an upgrade. So we have a lot of things to start spending on, and the question is, what is government responsible for spending for us? And my opinion is that government is not in the business of arts and crafts. Government is in the business of roads, police, fire, water, and power, at least in this town. And that's what government should spend its time doing. I guess that's enough for this moment.
Okay.
You can.
Thank you.
We'll come back.
My question hasn't been answered, and Chuck has offered to maybe give an answer to the question of safety, and I'd also like the question of how thorough was this investigation to come up with this $1 million estimate? So will you want to answer the first part, and
Yes,
I'll
let me take the first
call.
part.
Could you hold a second, please?
Child safety issue, the building maintenance and upkeep, the state of the repair issue were really only one of several issues that related to the $9 million bond election for the new elementary school. The primary issue which drove the consideration for a new vote was an increase in our student population. We have seen the elementary school increase by 61% since 1985. So the school district was more interested in making sure that the basically the baby boomers or the baby boom that we've seen in the upper Roaring Fork Valley over the last 7, 8, 9 years was accommodated in our school facilities, and the yellow brick building and the red brick building would not accommodate that increasing student population.
I have a caller. Let me take this.
Your name, please?
Hi, Steve Goldenberg. Hi, Bob.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
Okay, I have a few questions.
And again, Steve, for the audience, are you city resident or county resident?
City resident.
Okay. Steve, shoot.
And basically, I like the idea of an arts center. I would prefer if it was owned by the arts groups themselves, but the basic idea is nice. I have a couple of problems. I'd like to know what assurances do the citizens have that these will be used for really arts as opposed to administrative offices. I heard that one of the arts groups was going to have their administrator there instead of the airport business center. So I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't mind little kids dancing and painting and adults dancing and painting and taking classes, but I really would object strongly if it was an administrative use. And then secondly, and kind of related, is I would like an absolute assurance that the city will not be a tenant, because I can just see 5 years down the road that whole building will be city offices. So unless you covered this before.
Yes, and matter of fact, some of that was covered earlier. Maybe you didn't catch that part of the show, but we can come back on that question, though.
The last question is, who is there holding the bag if there's a cost overrun or rental income it falls short? Who's the landlord who has to make up the deficit?
I think you know the answer to that one.
Well, no, who's the landlord? I
Yeah.
heard that they were planning and trying to set up a way for the arts groups to be
Okay.
responsible for that. But if that's true, that's great. If it's not true, I'd like to know.
I think maybe Rachel will have some answers to your questions. Thanks for calling.
I'll hang up and
Okay.
watch you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to get an opportunity to respond to some of the other things that were thrown out at the very end, and I haven't had a chance to respond to yet. Steve, we did talk very much about keeping city offices out of the building. No one has an intention or desire to see city offices in there. And I think very specifically we can deal with that through the rezoning process by designating the area a spa, a specially planned area. It can become a very specific condition of approval that will ride with the property. I think that when you talk about what type of offices and what type of rehearsal and what type of space is going to go into the building, I can pass around a kind of a layout of what we've been looking at so far. And this is based mostly on space needs by the various groups. The groups are paying $12 a square foot plus utilities, and that gives them a good incentive to try and keep their uses as small as possible and to realistic needs. Also, we've been working with the Arts Council to develop a management and governance agreement. While that is still conceptual and undergoing some staff analysis to make sure there's no holes in that, the intention right now is that the building will be self-managed by either the arts groups as a tenant or through a nonprofit such as the Arts Council. The Arts Council is bringing forward to us a list of criteria which will be the first rating criteria for how to achieve the interaction and the real living experience of the Arts Center. I think it's a very difficult question to say at what point do you put a public radio station in the building and then tell the administrators they have to run out to an office in Basalt to do their payroll. I don't know how you separate the living and breathing aspects of the dance school and the ballet school from their need for administrative offices. It certainly is a need for the arts to survive in this community. And we've heard a lot of things kind of loosely thrown around about don't we have enough arts and aren't the arts successful enough? Well, the people who've been promoting arts in Aspen for the past 20 years have done so on a hand-to-mouth basis for a long period of time. And they came to us as City Council during the budget hearings in the fall, and as we were beginning to look for a way to produce revenue in the building, to buy the building, and said, you know, space is more important to us than money right now. We're tired of living in basement corners. We're tired of moving every 2 or 3 years when our rents are pushed up by Banana Republic and the commercial buildings in the downtown core. Space is more important to those arts groups and to staying and maintain a long-term presence in this community than ever before. And I don't think we're really talking about new arts groups. The Aspen's Writer Foundation has been around for 20 years in this town. I have a copy of an article in the Colorado Denver Post. It's a big color article, more advertising than the ACRA ever gets us, about summer in Aspen through the Writers' Conference. This is the type of business boost that we need as our economy here. there's been some discussion about the city's debt and the city's embondedness. I'd like to stress that all the bond issues have been voted for by the public. They're for things that we've wanted to buy, the golf course, the Rudai hydroelectric power, items like that. And the other thing very distinctly about the city's debt is it is associated with revenue-producing items. Over half of the city's bonded debt is for utilities, for the electric power plant, which is set up as an enterprise fund, for the water plant, for things that we need and will continue to need. When we stop drinking water and the town's a ghost town, then we have to worry about those bonds. But basically, our financial rating is very, very sound. And the July 15th, 1992, George K. Baum and Company discussion of bond rates, we've been trying to shop for the prices. Bond rating. At this time, we remain highly confident that the bonds issued to finance this project will be rated A by Moody Investor Services. This is the highest rating assigned to any resort community in the state of Colorado, and only Steamboat Springs and Breckenridge have similar ratings. We are also confident that this issue could qualify for municipal bond insurance, which would enhance the rating to AAA. The city is not in financial problems. There's this fear that we cannot make investments, that we fear that we cannot afford a gymnasium for our kids and an interactive arts and recreation center, and at the same time we're planning $50 million skyways to Snowmass. I don't understand it. As long as I get a closing comment, I had one more thing I wanted to hit on.
What I'd like to do, we have about 5 minutes left. I'd like to go around the table and give everybody a chance to sum up or to attack, if whatever the case may be. And I'm going to start with Lee Ambrose.
Well, okay, you can start with me, and I would like to ask a question of Chuck Brandt, which I'll hold off for just a second. But I think that we might note, Rachel, that Steamboat and Breckenridge are both owned by the Japanese at this point. Is that where we're headed?
I think that's not the town. I think that's the ski areas.
The ski areas, okay.
Well, the
And
ski
you
company
also
may
said
sell
a
to Japan
50
whether we want them to or not.
You also said a $50 million skyway to Snowmass or something. And the reality is that we have a major transportation problem here, which was the #1 item on the Roaring Fork Forum issues, and it is the #1 item in this valley, that a transportation problem needs to be resolved. And so we need to look at that as well. That is not going to come cheap. I'll just finish by asking one question of you, Chuck, and that is, does it really make any difference to the school board who buys the property? What you're really looking for is to get your $2.6+ million out of the property. You don't really care who buys it, do you?
What's your answer to that one?
My answer is a brief one. We live in this community, and we do believe that there is a community benefit to the sale of the red brick building to the city, Lee, and that was one of the reasons why we decided to not put the city off, but to make a deal with the city. What we like about it is this isn't a situation where government is being big brother or government is stepping upon the taxpayer. Here, the taxpayers have the ultimate say. The taxpayers have the vote, and I think that that's a very positive aspect of this discussion. And this election is, it's the taxpayers and not government having the say as to whether this building stays within the community or not.
Okay. Robert, are you ready? Are you doing a lot of calculating over there?
No, just
You're a calculating guy. What are you doing?
Scribbling. First of all, as I understand it, this will be a property tax issue. So when you say that the taxpayers will have a vote, the reality is that too many taxpayers will have a vote and not the people who are really going to pay for it. That's one issue. Secondly, the question is, asking the people to pay for something is, how many people does the Aspen Yoga Center serve? Does KAJX serve? Does the Aspen Art Museum, the Theater Writers Conference that you mentioned got great press, the Film Fest, the Kay Eldridge 12-month writer thing, the interactive? If these people cannot survive by contributions from the people that use them, then they shouldn't exist. Or they should exist and they should go through greater fundraising. I guess I had more to say than we have time, so the bottom line is really, it's time for the voters out there, particularly property owners, to start getting smart and to think in terms of your own personal money. It is a checkbook issue, as Mr. Cohn raised before, because 100 here, 100 there, another 100 down the road, and all of a sudden you're up another $2,000, $3,000 before the end of the decade. And I think that's too much. You're going to end up being just like Scarsdale, New York. And that's pretty much what I have to say.
And that's a terrible fate.
It is a terrible fate at $20,000 a year for
Scarsdale, New York.
taxes.
I think Rachel is ready to respond to some of these points.
Sure. First off, I'd like to say I don't mean to belittle the need for transportation, and the City Council is working very hard within the Aspen Area Community Plan and with the Snowmass residents and the BOCC on a transportation master plan. We all kind of got stopped on the highway to help contribute to that. There's a lot of discussion here about taxpayers and property taxes and taxpayers' rights. I hate to see it implied that people who do not own property should not have a voice in the community and do not add value to the community or do not have a say in what happens here. I think property taxes are passed on through rents, and the people who are voting for this will understand that as well as anything else. I think that when it comes to a community serving things like this, they're intangibles. Arts, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. These institutions deserve our support. We've had a lot of discussion over whether it should be by individual contributions who have big checkbooks or whether the community can do it as a whole. And this is simply an opportunity for the community to do it as a whole. Aspen's always been unique. We have a certain attractiveness here. We've got to see these things. We've got to list the fog from our eyes and say there are greater community values than money alone.
Thank you, Rachel. I think we're about at the end of our session today. I started off by saying that I was neutral. I hope that by taking on this task, I'd learn a lot, which I did. I hope that you've learned enough about it so that you can make a good decision when you go to the polls. And whichever it may be, I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to vote. I made up my mind, though, sitting here tonight. I've got a very clear idea what should be done, but I have to be neutral. I'm the moderator. Yeah. So how are we doing on time? We just about wrap it up? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
For everybody.
If anybody has further questions, I guess they could probably call all of us at home.
Or also, there'll be a meeting tomorrow morning at 7 in the Jerome Hotel where we can raise further discussion on this and the hospital issue.
And that meeting is at 7 for those of you that have
7 a.m.
7 a.m. So those of you who have to go to work, you can get up just a little bit before. It's a very important meeting.
And
See you
there's
there.
free coffee and rolls. Oh, that was
Yeah.
July 3rd.
Tomorrow is
Tomorrow.
July 3rd.